Hello friends, welcome to the inaugural Big Scary Book Club, where we read the intimidating books together. Let's discuss East of Eden. For those who aren't sure, Big Scary Books are the intimidating books, so maybe classics or just quite long books, or maybe the subject matter is really hard, or a bit of a mixture of all three. Bonus points for teeny tiny fonts. They're usually just the books that sit on your TBR for months, just kind of staring at you, mocking you, telling you that you're not good enough to read the big scary books, but you are, and we're gonna do it here. But first, let's talk about our refreshments. So today I am drinking a Coke Zero with ice and a lemon slice, and I've got my glass straw, can you see that? And this is my bee glass, so I don't think it's focusing, but it's got tiny bees on it, which is thrilling. What makes this book big and scary? Why does this book qualify? So this is a classic. It also it has pretty tiny font, would we not agree? Pretty small font. It's very much sweeping landscapes kind of book, which I think immediately has the capacity to put any reader off, and definitely puts me off unless I'm in the right mindset for it. The title is also a little bit existential, like it's a little bit scary, and I definitely think that titles can sometimes put me off if they feel a little bit big. And it is written by, and most of the characters are white men, which they can be great. There's just quite a lot of them in literature, and sometimes it feels like these types of books are dime a dozen. What is East of Eden about? I hope you've done your homework, but if you haven't, I'm just going to give you a little overview. East of Eden is a multi-generational tale that spans quite a long time, but it basically is the turn of the 20th. What's the turn of it? It's around the 1900s, and it's set in California in a valley, and it mostly follows the tales of two families, the Trasks and the Hamiltons. The Trasks are kind of wealthy and the Hamiltons are poor, and they mirror each other in a lot of other ways as well, and that creates quite an interesting contrast. As you might have guessed by the title, the book is also based on the Bible story of Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel are two sons, and Abel is the favored son by God, and so Cain kills Abel, and then God casts him away to a place that is to the east of Eden. Cain is ultimately forgiven by God for his sins, and I'm going to talk about it in more detail later. This becomes the most important theme of the book. It's that idea that anyone, if they put their mind to it, if they choose to, can overcome sin, can be a good person, and it's a very human story. It's really about how flawed people can be, but it doesn't necessarily place them in a box or a black and white. One of the interesting things about this book, and something that really actually struck me as I was reading it, was that it's a hybrid novel slash memoir. I would say that it mostly feels like a novel, but occasionally you are introduced to Steinbeck's character. So he is one of the kids of Samuel Hamilton, the patriarch's daughter. So he is a grandson, and he actually isn't really seen in the book other than just as the kind of narrator telling the story of what's going on. So although it does have this memoir perspective, it isn't actually a true story, but it is apparently meant to be written for John Steinbeck's kids. He wanted to introduce them to the area. Was this book as big and scary as I thought it was going to be? So because it's long, I'm always naturally quite apprehensive of long books, and I find myself judging them a bit more harshly because I'm like, justify the time I'm spending on this, please. And I have to say, in the case of this book, it was not as big and scary as I thought it was going to be. It is actually a very riveting tale. What I would say though is that the first 100 to 200 pages is a bit of a warm-up. Like, that can feel like a bit of a grind, but once you're in it and once the scene is set and you understand even just like what characters you're meant to be focusing on, because that's what I struggle with classics and long books and books with lots of characters. I'm jumping around and I'm like, okay, but when are we going to settle? You're introducing lots of people, but when are we gonna settle on the main person that I need to care about? And I did get that feeling a little bit with this, but ultimately it was actually kind of easy to read. Like the pace felt like it was carrying me along, even if sometimes the language was heavy and the messages were intense and required focus. And I did actually read this book a lot faster than I thought I would. I think it's one of those things, like once you have the momentum, it really does propel you forward. And spoiler alert, like I really enjoyed this book, so that would have been a part of it as well. What is your least favorite part of the book? I think this question has two ways of interpreting it. One is, which part did you not actually like that much in terms of the writing and like what the author was doing? And then the other way of answering it is just which part in the book did kind of upset you the most? Which part of the book would you really not like to go back to because you were sort of cringing? And maybe it's a mixture of two, like maybe you were kind of cringing because of what the author was doing. Anyway, feel free to interpret this question either of those ways. I'm gonna interpret it as which part made you cringe, which part upset you and you kind of don't want to relive. And that is the part where Samuel Hamilton meets Kathy for the first time. I thought quite long and hard about why this scene made me so uncomfortable and why I didn't enjoy it at all. So Sam Hamilton meets her and finds her really like weird, and then he goes, but Adam doesn't seem to notice that she's weird. And then Sam goes back to his wife and he's like, Kathy's really weird, like she was really unnerving to interact with. I just couldn't engage with her, like she didn't have any kind of warmth. And the reason why I found this really troubling is because it really brings home Adam's delusion around what Kathy is like, and it just makes my skin crawl. And this scene speaks to something broader that I really didn't like about this book, which is just Adam's marriage to Kathy in general. I think it was very necessary and it was a really good way of the author telling us about Adam's character, and it was also just like a really interesting storyline. But his marriage to Kathy really showed how much he was just kind of projecting onto her what he wanted her to be. And although, like, don't get me wrong, Kathy is terrible, but their marriage is just, I mean, it's stressful because you're just like waiting for it all to go wrong. But yeah, it's just this thing of Adam actually not treating Kathy like a person and just idolizing her. That was really uncomfortable. And then seeing Abra do the same, then seeing Aaron do the same thing to Abra. It's really weird as well because when you read these kinds of books, you are reminded of like modern language that is used to describe it. So like, I think Adam and Aaron in a funny way would probably be described as a bit of a nice guy, the nice guy trope, the negative nice guy trope, where you have a guy who superficially is respectful and good to women, but still ultimately doesn't quite treat them like whole people and doesn't quite see them as whole people. And Adam and Aaron, that really came to mind for me. What was your favorite part of the book? I really struggled with this question because I just thought the book was so rich in favorite parts. Like, I'm a sucker for emotional, like multi-layered character moments, and this book is just chock full of them. And I'm actually going to read you the bit. So it's quite far in, and it's when Adam's lost all his money to the freezer venture, and Cal, Adam's least favorite son, is asking Will Hamilton to help him make money. And Cal tells Will that he wants the money so that he can give Adam the money that he had lost. And I noted it here, page 566. I've called this note, "Nearly everyone has their box of secret pain." I just think it's a classic example of just such intense feeling portrayed through the writing. And Will, again, for those who don't know, Will is the one who's being asked for money, and he's basically taken aback by Cal and his devotion to his dad, and Cal wanting to do that for his dad because Will is a bit of a, like, he's the black sheep of his own family. Will's fleshy face contorted and a memory swept over him like a chilling wind. He did not move slowly over the past, it was all there in one flash. All of the years, a picture, a feeling and a despair, all stopped the way a fast camera stops the world. There was the flashing Samuel, beautiful as dawn, with a fancy like a swallow's flight, and the brilliant brooding Tom, who was dark fire, Una who rode the storms, and lovely Molly, Desi of laughter, George handsome, with a sweetness that filled the room like the perfume of flowers. And there was Joe, the youngest, the beloved. Each one, without effort, brought some gift into the family. Nearly everyone has his box of secret pain, shared with no one. Will had concealed his well, laughed loud, exploited perverse virtues, and never let his jealousy go wandering. He thought of himself as slow, doltish, conservative, uninspired. No great dream lifted him high, and no despair forced self-destruction. He was always on the edge, trying to hold on to the rim of the family with what gifts he had: care and reason, application. He kept the books, hired the attorneys, called the undertaker, and eventually paid the bills. The others didn't even know they needed him. He had an ability to get money and to keep it. He thought the Hamiltons despised him for his one ability. He had loved them doggedly and had always been at hand with his money to pull them out of their errors. He thought they were ashamed of him, and he fought bitterly for their recognition. All of this was in the frozen wind that blew through him. His slightly bulging eyes were damp as he stared past Cal, and the boy asked, "What's the matter, Mr. Hamilton? Don't you feel well?" Will had sensed his family, but he had not understood them. And they had accepted him without knowing there was anything to understand. And now this boy came along. Will understood him, felt him, sensed him, recognized him. Is that not just so emotive? So yeah, honestly, I think there are so many passages like that that are kind of my favorite moments. But I think in terms of one that really speaks to, I have a lot of siblings, and anything that's like sibling or like place in a family or like family dynamics related, I just really love reading about. So that is my favorite part, because it just makes you feel such intense empathy for Will Hamilton. What surprised you most about the book? The character Lee is a Chinese American character who works for Adam Trask, and he's an incredibly devoted servant. So he's basically completely put his own life on hold to work for them. And quite early on, I think it's when Sam first meets Lee, they have this incredible conversation about code switching. That's like my modern language on it. Lee's talking about how he changes his accent depending on who he's talking to. He's capable of speaking in an American accent, but he speaks in a kind of Chinese accent whenever he's talking to white Americans, because that's what they expect from him. And he describes how he talks to them like that because for a while he spoke in an American accent, and the only thing that happened was Chinese American people didn't trust him and white American people didn't trust him. So he ended up just kind of giving up on that. I just thought that was an incredibly ahead of its time passage to have in a book. And this was published in the 1950s. And I also think Lee's character in general, I mean, we'll get to it, but he's my favorite character. Like, he's an incredible character, so well-rounded, and he's the kind of most intelligent character in the book, really. Not just in terms of like academic intelligence, but he's very, very empathetic and ridiculously kind of wise. So I think that character and a lot of the conversations that character has really surprised me. I think also, although all of the other main characters are men, Kathy's character did also surprise me because she is a woman. She was very well filled out, and it kind of felt like she got the same treatment as the men in the book. But what I will say about that is, because I have a bit of a theory, I do think that Kathy being a main character and a woman, there is a little bit of a caveat, because Kathy's character is sort of, by my interpretation, not quite human. Like, I think she's meant to be the devil or kind of devilish. So I'm suspicious that that is the reason why her character got given, ironically, like a more human, man-like treatment by Steinbeck. That's maybe I'm cynical. I'll be curious to see like what you think, because yeah, I've read a lot about people debating whether Kathy's character is meant to be the devil and not human, or like maybe a little bit like that, or whether she is actually fully human. How does the book's title work in relation to the book's contents? As I mentioned earlier, the title is as it is, because it's based on the Cain and Abel story, where Cain, after disobeying God, is exiled to Nod. Another reason why it is called East of Eden is because the name implies that the characters are the first ones to have been kind of kicked out of Eden, and they're having to contend with the world. And I think because this book is so into what it means to be human and exploring morality, I think that really makes sense as a title. I also think even if you have no understanding of that context, even if you don't know the Bible story or relate it to that, I think it works as a title because it's so epic sounding. East of Eden makes it sound incredibly vast, and that's because not only is it not focused on a person or one action, so you know it's going to be like a multi-character epic tale. So not only is that the case, but it's also even just saying East of Eden as opposed to calling it a specific location. Obviously East of Eden is a very big place, like there's a lot of stuff east of Eden. That's how I interpret it anyway. And then again, even if you don't know the Bible story, but you kind of know Eden because it's sort of moved into like common language, you know that East of Eden is not Eden. You get that there's gonna be a contrast, like it's probably a tough life out there. Which characters did you like best? My favourite character was Lee, with Sam Hamilton as a joint second. I think Lee was such a wise, calming, intelligent character. I really felt like I wanted a Lee in my life. He was always there with nuggets of wisdom and interesting things to say. Though I guess there is like a sadness around Lee because, as I said, he completely gave up his chance at a life to spend it with the Trasks. And although he ends up, you know, he leaves and then ends up returning shortly after and it's like, no, I want to be with you guys, it still feels like it's sad, and it's a reflection of like how few or how limited his opportunities really were. But yeah, I just thought whenever you knew that Lee and Sam were about to interact, you just knew it was going to be a good chat. Both of them are such chit chats, but Lee is a little bit more, like Sam's a little bit waffly, but Lee you could count on to give him a little bit of direction and make the conversation actually an interesting one to read about. And of course, the main theme of the book around good and evil, that was first like explicitly said by Lee, or at least suggested by Lee. Don't you see, the American Standard Translation orders men to triumph over sin, and you call sin ignorance. The King James translation makes a promise in thou shalt, meaning that men will surely triumph over sin. But the Hebrew word thou timshel, thou mayest, that gives a choice. It might be the most important word in the world. That says the way is open. As I said, Sam was my second favourite. He was a little bit idealist and a little bit almost annoying at times, but I don't know if I'm just intolerant. But I also enjoyed how Sam's character was a kind of direct contrast to Adam's. Adam was rich, Sam was poor. Adam's wife was pretty morally bankrupt, and Sam's wife was like the most religious person you can ever come across. Adam's farm was highly farmable. Sam's farm was unfarmable. Are those words? Are those real words that I'm using? But aside from those contrasts, I also think that Sam and his family, they were very necessary to understanding Adam's story better and the Trask's family's story better, because they gave this context, but they also gave the audience a bit of a bridge. And you saw Sam's character especially would often be the one asking the questions. So going back to Adam being absolutely in love with Kathy, and just being very delusional about it, you read about it and you kind of feel like, this is kind of weird, and maybe he should like double check his feelings. And then when he meets Sam immediately confirms for you as a reader your suspicions. And I think that is a huge part of why the book was easy to read, despite being dense and rich and dealing with quite complex themes. The actual reading of it was like you were pointed in the right directions mostly by Sam actually. Thanks, Sam. What did you think of the writing? Are there any standout sentences? I apologize in advance because I really like the writing. So I have many a standout sentence and I'm gonna read some of them to you. It's my little notes list. Okay, so the first bit I came across that I really enjoyed because I found it funny was, I think it was Sam's wife being described. She's described as humorless as a chicken. And I googled it because I was like, oh, maybe this is a turn of phrase, or like even like an old turn of phrase. And it's not. Like, he was just calling her a chicken. It's kind of funny, no? Next up, we have page 25. It's about Cyrus's lies and his deceit. How Cyrus managed to make this understood without saying it was a triumph of insinuation. No one could call him a liar, and this was mainly because the lie was in his head, and any truth coming from his mouth carried the color of a lie. Isn't that just such like a beautiful way of talking about like someone convincing themselves of something, and so it's sort of becoming true to them. Okay, next, we actually have the next page. Are we ready? When a child first catches adults out, when it first walks into his grave little head that adults do not have divine intelligence, that their judgments are not always wise, their thinking true, their sentences just, his world falls into panic desolation. The gods are fallen and all safety gone. And there is one sure thing about the fall of gods. They do not fall a little. They crash and shatter or sink deeply into green muck. It is a tedious job to build them up again. They never quite shine. And the child's world is never quite whole again. It is an aching kind of growing. Is that not like the most relatable thing ever? I feel like everyone remembers the disillusionment of realizing that adults don't know everything, and that was just such a beautiful, incredible way of describing it. I then have noted, but I'm not going to read it to you, but I just thought it was really intense, the letter that Charles sent to Adam. I thought their relationship was really extraordinary, and like the way he literally tried to kill him. Okay, let's go next one. I have wondered why it is that some people are less affected and torn by the verities of life and death than others. Una's death cut the earth from under Samuel's feet and opened his defended keep and let in old age. On the other hand, Liza, who surely loved her family as deeply as did her husband, was not destroyed or warped. Her life continued evenly. She felt sorrow, but she survived it. I think perhaps Liza accepted the world as she accepted the Bible, with all of its paradoxes and its reverses. She did not like death, but she knew it existed, and when it came, it did not surprise her. Samuel may have thought and played and philosophized about death, but he did not really believe in it. His world did not have death as a member. He and all around him was immortal. When real death came, it was an outrage, a denial of the immortality he deeply felt, and the one crack in his wall caused the whole structure to crash. I think he had always thought he could argue himself out of death. It was a personal opponent and one he could lick. To Liza, it was simply death. Why, like this, what an incredibly poignant passage. Like how, because it's so true, like people have such different approaches to grief, but this description of the two different approaches is like, it feels very real, it feels very true, and this book's incredible. Okay, let's read a final one before we go. The boys exchanged uneasy glances. It was their first experience with the inexorable logic of woman, which is overwhelming even, or perhaps especially, when it is wrong. This was new to them, exciting and frightening. And that brings to a close the first edition of the Big Scary Book Club. I hope you enjoyed this video. Next month we are talking about A Little Life, so let's get reading it. I'm pretty nervous because whenever I mention I'm going to read A Little Life, everyone will always comment like, oh, good luck, and it's always like, ew. But often it's like, oh, it's really good, but... so I'm nervous, but we're gonna do it together. We are gonna do it together. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I will probably develop the structure as we go along of this series. Definitely I think it would be fun to explore some things a little bit deeper and answer maybe some slightly more academic questions, but for now I had a really great time talking about this book in more depth, and I hope you did too. And I will see you next week and next month for the next Big Scary Book Club. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.